I always considered myself an ordinary student studying at a small college in the town. I spent most of my time in the library. This place was always a quiet haven where I could escape from daily problems and immerse myself in books. But one night, everything changed. It was a Wednesday, and I was preparing for an important history exam. The library, as usual, was almost empty. Only a few students wandered between the shelves, and the librarian, Mrs. Lilly, sat at her desk absorbed in some old book. I chose a spot in the far corner of the library, where it was usually the quietest. Hours flew by, and I didn't even notice how closing time approached. Mrs. Lilly announced that the library would close in 10 minutes. I gathered my things and was ready to leave when I remembered that I had left my notes in the reading room on the second floor. In a hurry, I went up there, but when I returned, the entrance doors were already closed. Panic started to rise in me, but I decided that the best option was to find Mrs. Lilly and ask her to open the door. I began searching for her throughout the library, but she had disappeared. No trace, only silence and the dim light from the old lamps. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound. It was the creak of a door in the old part of the library, which was closed to visitors. I decided to check, thinking that perhaps Mrs. Lilly was there. Approaching closer, I noticed that the door was slightly open. I went inside and saw long rows of old bookshelves covered in dust. The air here was heavy and suffocating. My heart started pounding faster when I realized I heard footsteps behind me. I quickly turned around but saw no one. Maybe it was just the wind, I thought, but the feeling of unease didn't leave me. I decided to go further, hoping to find an exit. As I walked between the shelves, I heard the footsteps again. Now they were closer. I stopped and turned around, but again saw no one. This was starting to scare me. Suddenly, I heard a whisper. The words were indistinguishable, but they were clearly directed at me. I decided to find the source of the sound, no matter how scary it was. As I walked between the shelves, I saw light at the end of the corridor. Approaching closer, I saw an old storage room. The door was slightly open, and soft light poured from inside. I cautiously opened the door and peeked inside. On the floor sat a girl who looked like she had been there for many years. Her face was familiar. It was Mary, a student who disappeared last year. Her eyes were empty, and her hair was disheveled. "Mary?" I asked, not believing my eyes. She raised her head and looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Help me," she said quietly. I approached closer, trying to understand what had happened to her. She was holding an old book that looked very valuable. "What happened?" I asked, sitting down next to her. "I can't find the way out," she replied. "They won't let me go." "Who are they?" I asked, puzzled. She just looked at me with horror in her eyes and whispered, "The librarians." My heart started pounding faster. I didn't understand what she meant, but her fear was real. I decided we needed to act. We had to find a way out of here together. I helped Mary get up, and we started looking for an exit from this old part of the library. Several minutes passed when I realized we were constantly returning to the same place. The corridors seemed endless, and the shelves infinite. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us. Turning around, I saw a shadow moving between the shelves. We started running, trying to find an exit. The footsteps grew closer, and we got more and more entangled in the maze of books. Finally, we found a door leading to the first floor. Opening it, we found ourselves in a familiar part of the library, but here a new challenge awaited us. Mrs. Lilly stood by the exit, looking at us with a cold gaze. "You shouldn't have gone into the old part of the library," she said. "We're just looking for an exit," I replied, trying to hide my fear. "The exit was always here," she said and opened the door. Mary and I quickly stepped outside, feeling the cold air engulf us. I turned to thank Mrs. Lilly, but she was already gone. The library doors were closed, and silence reigned around us. After that night, I never returned to the library. Mary went missing again, and no one saw her anymore. I will always remember the horror I felt in the old part of the library. Sometimes at night, it seems I hear a whisper calling me back, but I know I will never cross that threshold again. When I was in university, I would take 7 courses every semester because I was doing a dual degree and I wanted to get it all done in 4 years. This meant a lot of semesters I was up to my neck and ears in homework and studying all the time. My university had a library that was open until midnight. I was also interning that semester, so I really had almost no time to do my work. I still lived on campus at this point, and my suite mates could be very loud and distracting sometimes. This was a Wednesday night. I had 4 classes that day and my internship. I also had 2 exams the following day, so right after I finished up at my internship, I went straight to the library. Our campus library was very big. When I got there at 8:30 p.m., there were still a decent number of people everywhere, but from 9 to 10 o'clock, it quieted down a lot, and I was planning on being there until 12 o'clock, studying for my 2 exams the next day. Around 10 o'clock, most people were gone, but there were still some around. I was sitting at one of the tables sandwiched between 2 bookshelves on either side, so it was a little more private and secluded where I was sitting, with fewer distractions. By 11 o'clock, some guy who looked to be in his upper 20s came into the section past one of the multiple empty tables and came to mine, where he sat down diagonally across from me at the table. I looked up, and he looked back at me and smiled as he was setting his books down. I looked back down and just tried to focus on my studying and not wonder too much why he decided to sit at my table. I was going through the slides to study on my laptop when the guy at my table said, "Excuse me," then asked me if I, by chance, was taking a specific economics course. I politely told him, "No, sorry," hoping that would be the end of it. But then he started explaining why he asked that, because his professor gives pop quizzes every day. I said, "Wow, that really sucks." Then I tried to go back to studying. Mentally, my mind wasn't completely into the material anymore. Now I was distracted by the presence of this man who I had a feeling was going to keep trying to talk to me. I looked up from my laptop screen and saw that man looking at me, smiling with his lips. I looked back down at my laptop, contemplating getting up and moving elsewhere or just leaving. He then asked my name. I made up a name and said, "Linda." He said, "You have such blue eyes, Linda." This was when I started to wonder if this man was really here to study or creep on women, and the fact that he looked like he was almost 30 didn't help. I asked him what the name of his economics professor was. He took a second, then said, "Professor Luis." I asked if he knew the first name. He shook his head, "No." I went straight to web and looked up any professors with the last name Luis at our school. Only one came up, a calculus professor whose last reviews were left years ago. I decided to get up and go ask the security worker at the front door for help. As I got up, I felt the stare of that man at the table watching me walk over to the security worker and tell him that this man was creeping me out, and I don't think he's a student. The security worker walked back over with me and asked to see the man's student ID. He started looking through his wallet, then his pockets, and then he said he must have left it at his dorm. The security worker then asked what dorm building he's in. The guy was clearly lying because he didn't know what to say and eventually just said, "I honestly don't remember what it's called." The security worker walked him out of the library and came back and told me to just be careful while walking back to my dorm. I thanked him. The whole rest of the time at the library, my mind was so distracted just thinking about what a creep that guy was. I did my best to keep studying, and around 12, I knew it was time to wrap it up so I could get some sleep. I packed up and left through the same way the security guard escorted that man out. He wasn't standing there at that moment. I don't know where he went. I started walking through the basically deserted campus. No one walks around that late on a Monday to Wednesday night. That's why eventually, when I was nearing my dorm building and I heard at least one loud sound of a shoe hitting the concrete behind me, I turned around but saw no one there. I knew for a fact I heard a footstep, though. I started to run now, which may have been a mistake because the second I started to run, which was made more difficult because of my backpack, I heard running footsteps behind me. I turned and saw that man from the library sprinting towards me. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but only for a second before I was tackled to the ground and had a hand over my mouth. He kept threatening me, saying, "You better shut up or I'll kill you." I genuinely thought my life was about to end. I was trying to call out for help still, but it was muffled by his hand. He then got to his feet and started to drag me by the throat out of sight of the main walkways. I saw he was dragging me in the direction of the woods right by the dorms. I managed to remove his hand from my mouth for just long enough to scream again. It was enough to get the attention of these two guys who came running over, yelling, "Hey, stop," at my kidnapper. The man let go of me and started running off towards the woods. The two guys came over to me, and I'm sure they were asking me if I was okay and whatnot, but I blocked all noise out for a few moments as I was in total shock. I completely let my emotions out and started bawling my eyes out. The two guys called university police, and I did my best to keep myself together and explain. We went to the library to ask the security worker for his description of the man as well. It matched my description of the man. The police were also able to use the footage from the library cameras to get a clear picture of the man's face. The picture was sent out to all students' phones, emails, and the school website. That same night, there was an anonymous tip that the man was at a late-night dive bar down the road from the school. The police arrived at the bar and arrested him. The level of trauma this induced on me was incredible. I can't even imagine the trauma for those who weren't as lucky as me in situations like this. I'm a librarian. This is something that happened a few years ago at the library that I used to work at. This library was pretty close to my apartment, so close that occasionally I would walk to and from work. Now, it was about a 15-minute walk, so I only really did this when the weather was nice or if I wanted extra exercise or just felt like it. The library that I worked in I would describe as pretty average-sized. It was not that small, but also not too large. I really enjoyed it for the most part. Well, one night I was working until the time we closed at 8 p.m. I had walked to work that day, so I would be walking back as well. Things quieted down in the library significantly in the last hour that we were open. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, I was the only person there. I then went over, I locked the doors and then went around the library, making sure that everything was in order. After that, I was able to leave. I started walking home, which would be on several different sidewalks. Normally, when I would walk home after a closing shift, I would be the only person on the sidewalk for most of the way. It really wasn't that common of an area for people to walk, especially at night. But on this night, literally within the first minute, I heard somebody walking behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw a hooded man wearing a gray sweatshirt trailing me a ways back. Instantly, I was nervous, and I didn't want to cause myself to panic or anything. I told myself that it was fine. But as I kept walking, the man remained behind me. When I turned, he did as well. I remember at that point I took a wrong turn intentionally onto a different road that was sort of out of my way. The man behind me did the same thing. Then, at the end of that block, I turned back and reconnected with the road that we had been on. The man still did the same thing. At that point, it confirmed to me that he was following me intentionally. This made me really nervous. I also realized that I had not brought my pepper spray with me to work. Normally, when I walk to work, I do, but I forgot on this day, which was bad luck. So I kept walking back home, and the man remained the same distance back. Soon, though, I reached a McDonald's restaurant. Never in my life was I so happy to see one. They were open, and I walked inside. When I did, the man did not go in but seemed to stop somewhere in the parking lot. After going in, I waited and texted my friend Mina. I told her of the situation and asked her to come and pick me up. She agreed, and luckily she lived very close to me, so within 5 minutes, she had arrived. I quickly left the restaurant and went into her car. We drove away, and I did not notice the man when we left. But luckily, I made it back home safely. After that, I didn't walk to work for a while, but that's not the last I saw of the man. This was probably almost a week later, and I was working another closing shift. I was behind the counter where I would usually work. From my view, I could see several bookshelves as well as some of the computers that we had. I remember at about 7:30 p.m., the library had become very quiet. I had only noticed a couple of people here and there, and some had left. Then I casually looked around and noticed that the same man who had followed me home was sitting at one of the computer desks. He looked up at me, and it really creeped me out. I tried my best not to look at him, but when I glanced back over, he was gone. I was really glad to see that soon it was 8 o'clock. I just hoped that the man had actually left the library. I went over and locked the doors like usual, then I went around the library to make sure everything was in order. Now, I had already done the announcements, such as, "The library is closing in 10 minutes," and "The library is now closed." Those announcements were made so if anybody was here, they knew that they were supposed to be gone by now. I went around the library, going up and down each aisle of bookshelves. Everything was empty, but when I approached the back corner of the library, I heard a noise. I looked over and saw that the same man was still here, and he was entering the aisle that I was in. My heart instantly started racing. I told the man that we were closed. He didn't answer me or say anything but kept approaching. I moved away and ran out of the aisle. I went to the next one over and heard the man coming after me. I then ran out of that aisle and quickly into another one, trying to confuse the man. I was able to stay ahead of him, going from one aisle to another like it was a maze. I heard footsteps in the distance but couldn't tell exactly where the man was. I then slowed down and tried to listen better. When I did, it seemed like he slowed down too. Very carefully, I moved out to another aisle. I needed to get to the front of the library where the doors were. I slowly moved over to the side wall and then went alongside it. I heard the man starting to approach, so I had to stop. I went around a corner into a little nook area where a comfortable chair was for reading. I went behind the chair and hid. The man walked closer but did not know exactly where I was, so he didn't go to the exact area but got within maybe 30 feet. He passed by and moved a little farther down from where I was. Then I carefully and quietly moved out from my hiding place. I walked back along the side wall until I could see the front doors. When I did, I started sprinting for them. When I did this, it gave away my location. The man started running after me, but he was a long way away. I made it to the doors and went outside. Then I got to my car, quickly went inside, and then watched the front doors. But the man did not leave. I called the police and waited there in my car. The police got there a short time later. They went inside and soon came out with the man. I was very grateful to have escaped. Looking back, I honestly don't know how I did it. I worked at that library for a few more months and then changed locations to where I currently work. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.